Archiving history. Let's explore.
In New York City, on October 27, 1858, a second son arrived in a grand brownstone. He was christened Theodore Roosevelt Jr. Born into wealth and privilege, he was also sickly, plagued by asthma so severe that doctors feared for his life. From an early age, Roosevelt resolved not to be defined by his body. Under his father's guiding advice to make his own body, his own choice, he began a regime of boxing, gymnastics, and long carriage rides. With each challenge, his lungs grew stronger, his frame sturdier. He began living by a philosophy he would later call the strenuous life. Behind these workouts were not vanity, but a mantra. Resilience can be constructed just like muscles. By the time he reached Harvard in 1876, where he studied zoology, languages, and history, he had already reinvented himself. He boxed, rode, hunted, and hiked, excelling both physically and intellectually. At Harvard, Theodore Roosevelt fell in love twice, first with the pursuit of knowledge, and second with a woman named Alice Hathaway Lee. Alice was luminous, graceful, intelligent, and sharp in wit. Roosevelt was utterly captivated. They married in 1880. He called her his beautiful little wife, and to friends he radiated joy. Together, they seemed destined for a life of promise. By 1882, Roosevelt had launched into politics, winning election to the New York State Assembly. His energy was boundless, debating policy by day, reading history by night, writing his first book at 23. His star was rising. Then came the day that would break him. On February 14, 1884, his mother, Martha, died of typhoid fever in the family home. Just hours later, upstairs in the same house, his beloved Alice died of undiagnosed nephritis, only 2 days after giving birth to their daughter, Alice Lee Roosevelt. In his diary, Roosevelt marked that day with a large black X and a single sentence: "The light has gone out of my life." Shattered, he fled. He left his infant daughter in the care of his sister, abandoned politics, and headed west to the Dakota Badlands. There, he remade himself again, among cowhands and frontier sheriffs, in blizzards and branding fires. Roosevelt found solitude, scars, and strength. He even served as a deputy sheriff in Billings County, North Dakota, tracking fugitives and enforcing law across hundreds of wild, wind-carved miles. He rode for days alone, hunted elk and bandits alike. He built cabins and broke horses, 600 cattle and very few fences. No audience, no pity, just sky. He learned what it meant to endure, not as a young aristocrat, but as a man. By 1886, he returned to New York, older, steelier, and remarried to his childhood friend, Edith Caro. They would raise a bustling family at Sagamore Hill, a home he would call his real base of operation. The West had left its mark. The pain, the prairie, the solitude, they had shaped him. And Roosevelt would never again be the man he was before that cold Valentine's Day. In 1897, Theodore Roosevelt became Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he was itching for action. He believed that greatness came through trial, and America was becoming too comfortable. When Spain's colonial hold over Cuba began to collapse in 1898, and reports of brutality and rebellion reached Washington, Roosevelt saw his chance. The U.S. declared war that April, ostensibly to free Cuba, but also to flex American muscle on the world stage. Roosevelt didn't want to stay behind a desk. He resigned his position, stunned his peers, and joined the fight, but not as a private citizen. Roosevelt helped organize the first U.S. Volunteer Cavalry Regiment, a fully sanctioned military unit. The press went on to call them the Rough Riders. Their ranks were a fascinating contradiction: New Mexico cowboys, Texas Rangers, New York polo players, Ivy League athletes, former sheriffs, miners, and frontiersmen. Roosevelt's charisma and political connections helped assemble this band of mismatched Americans into a single fighting force. Officially, the regiment was under the command of Colonel Leonard Wood, but Roosevelt was its beating heart, and later its acting commander in the field. In June 1898, they landed in Cuba. Their first real test was at Las Guasimas, where the Rough Riders exchanged fire with entrenched Spanish forces in dense jungle. It was a chaotic fight. Poor maps, tropical heat, and unclear orders, but the unit held. Then came July 1st, the Battle of San Juan Heights, a larger assault on key ridges overlooking the city of Santiago. The Rough Riders were ordered to take Kettle Hill, one of two critical slopes. Roosevelt, dressed in a custom uniform and wearing rimless spectacles, mounted a horse named Texas and led the charge uphill under blistering fire. Bullets tore past, horses bucked, soldiers fell, yet Roosevelt never slowed. Shouting encouragement, revolver in hand, he climbed the ridge, reached the Spanish trench line, and helped secure the position. It was a brutal, breathless fight. From Kettle Hill, Roosevelt and the Rough Riders could see the bigger prize, just east of their position, San Juan Hill. It was a steeper, more heavily defended rise, crowned with Spanish trenches and machine gun nests. But they weren't alone. Buffalo soldiers from the all-black 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments were already engaged, having borne the brunt of the initial Spanish fire. The two forces, one historic, the other mythic, advanced together, exchanging gunfire and rallying through shouts. Artillery exploded behind them. The jungle sweltered. Confusion reigned. Orders were garbled and units became misaligned. But the momentum surged forward. Roosevelt, on foot now after his horse was left behind, continued shouting, firing, and pushing upward. By mid-afternoon, the hill was theirs. The Spanish defenders retreated. Santiago de Cuba, the island's strategic stronghold, was now exposed. Within days, the city would surrender, effectively ending major combat in the war. Roosevelt returned home a national sensation, the aristocrat who had fought like a frontiersman. The newspapers loved it, the public even more. In a matter of weeks, he was elected governor of New York. And just like that, the battlefield had become his springboard. In 1900, Roosevelt was reluctantly nominated for vice president. Despite initial hesitations, he accepted and campaigned vigorously. When President McKinley was re-elected that November, Theodore Roosevelt stood firm on the national ticket alongside him. Roosevelt hadn't expected to wield power so soon, but fate had other plans. Just months into his vice presidency, tragedy struck. On September 6th in Buffalo, New York, McKinley was attending a public reception when a man stepped forward in line. His hand was wrapped in a handkerchief concealing a pistol. Leon Czolgosz, an anarchist, fired 2 shots into the president's chest. McKinley seemed to recover, but soon worsened. On September 14, he died of gangrene. Roosevelt had been hiking in the Adirondacks when the news reached him. By the time he descended from the mountains, he was President of the United States, at just 42 years old, the youngest ever to take the oath. The nation was in shock, but Roosevelt did not hesitate. He had long lived by a phrase he often repeated: "Speak softly and carry a big stick, and you will go far." It wasn't bravado, it was strategy. For him, diplomacy should always come first, but behind it, there must be credible strength. As president, he applied this thinking not just to foreign affairs, but to domestic governance. His strength wasn't only in the United States military. It was also executive will, used to confront monopolies, mediate labor crises, and remind the nation that the presidency could lead with both principle and power. And he wielded it. In 1902, a massive coal strike in Pennsylvania threatened to paralyze the nation's heating supply. Neither mine owners nor labor leaders would budge. So Roosevelt did something no president had done before. He summoned both sides to the White House, forced negotiations, and even threatened to send federal troops, not against the miners, but against the operators. His message was clear. Government would no longer serve industry, it would serve the people. Roosevelt was reshaping the presidency, not as a distant manager, but as a moral actor, a referee when necessary, and a leader of the national will. He believed that unchecked corporate power was a threat to democracy itself. Monopolies, he warned, didn't just stifle competition, they stifled the people. So he acted. He revived enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, targeting giant trusts that had dominated railroads, finance, and industry. In 1902, he took on the Northern Securities Company, a powerful railroad monopoly backed by J.P. Morgan. The Supreme Court sided with Roosevelt, ordering the company broken apart. It was just the beginning. Over his presidency, he launched 43 antitrust suits, earning him the nickname Trustbuster. But Roosevelt's reforms weren't just economic. His domestic agenda, which he called the Square Deal, sought fairness for workers, consumers, and the land. He pushed for federal regulation of the railroads, demanded stricter food and drug laws, and enacted reforms to clean up the meatpacking industry. At the same time, he launched the first major steps in national conservation, establishing parks, forests, and wildlife refuges to protect America's natural resources. Roosevelt believed the federal government should not be passive. It should stand boldly with the people against greed, corruption, and private empires. Even after leaving office, Roosevelt never slowed. He went on an African safari, explored the Amazon, and published his adventures, preserving his legend in both print and film. Yet politics still called. In 1912, disillusioned with his successor Taft, he launched the Progressive Bull Moose campaign. On October 14, 1912, John Fleming Schrank, a saloon keeper from New York, attempted to assassinate Roosevelt. After being shot in the chest, Teddy continued his speech for roughly 50 minutes before accepting medical attention. He famously declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." Somehow, he still lost. However, his platform reshaped American reform. He also reshaped the world. Roosevelt flexed American muscle with diplomacy and might, sending the Great White Fleet to project naval power, completing the Panama Canal to link oceans, and brokering peace in the Russo-Japanese War, earning the first Nobel Peace Prize ever awarded to a U.S. president. He protected over 230 million acres of wilderness, signed the Antiquities Act, and founded national parks, forests, and wildlife refuges, forever changing how America treats its natural heritage. And in 1902, after refusing to shoot a tied-up bear, he even inspired a symbol of empathy, the teddy bear. Roosevelt died in 1919, just months after his son Quentin perished in World War I. He was 60. But the world he left behind, bolder, greener, more just, still echoes with his charge. Live the strenuous life, speak softly, and carry a big stick. Would you like to learn more? Check out our website and subscribe at archivinghistory.com.